"You'll wed him for duty, not love," her mother said, but the billionaire's first words left her breathless. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter family. May the Almighty cover every woman with unshakable strength, a calm no storm can disturb, and a grace that never runs dry. May the tears you cried in secret return as miracles, and the nights you spent in silence turn into mornings filled with joy. May every betrayal guide you toward protection, and every closed door lead you to the path meant only for you. You are the light of your home, the quiet warrior, the keeper of compassion and love. May God breathe courage into your spirit, healing into your memories, and victory into every step you take. May blessings chase you, may destiny lift you, and may joy return in ways that leave you speechless. My precious family, your voice builds this home. If love lives in your heart, like this video. If faith walks with you, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter." The library smelled like power and cruelty. Cecilia Beck sat motionless in the leather chair, while Vivian Liskey circled her like a predator evaluating prey. The woman's heels struck the mahogany floor with rhythmic violence, each click a small declaration of dominance. Adequate bone structure, healthy teeth, wide hips for childbearing. Vivian spoke to the room itself, not bothering to address Cecilia as human. "She'll photograph acceptably for society pages, I suppose." Cecilia stared at the fireplace where flames consumed wood with indifferent hunger. 3 weeks ago, her father had arrived home with bankruptcy papers and pleading eyes, explaining the Beck family textile business could only survive through marriage to the Liska empire, her body traded for her family's financial salvation. She hadn't cried then. She wouldn't cry now. "My son arrives shortly," Vivian continued, stopping directly before Cecilia. "Andrew understands his obligations. This union expands our distribution networks while providing diversity optics. You'll produce heirs, minimum 2, preferably 3. Your family's debts dissolve in exchange." "I understand," Cecilia managed, through a throat lined with broken glass. The doors burst open. Cecilia's breath caught involuntarily. Andrew Liskey entered like controlled chaos, sharp angles, expensive charcoal suit, dark hair disheveled as though he'd been clawing at it, but his eyes stopped her heart, deep brown, burning with something dangerous, intelligent, almost rebellious. Those eyes found hers across 20 feet of Persian carpet, and everything tilted. The impact felt physical, reaching inside her chest and squeezing. 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. They simply stared. She watched his jaw tighten, his hands curl into fists, something flicker across his features that resembled recognition, as if he'd been unconsciously searching and just realized she'd been here waiting. "Andrew, how gracious of you to finally appear. This is Cecilia Beck, your future wife." The transformation happened with terrifying speed. Andrew's face became polite indifference, his posture rigidly professional. When he looked at Cecilia again, his eyes held nothing except cool assessment. "Miss Beck." His voice was smooth, empty. He didn't extend his hand. Vivian smiled with undisguised satisfaction. "Shall we review contracts? I've had attorneys prepare everything. The ceremony occurs in 6 weeks. Cecilia moves to the East Wing afterward, separate bedrooms naturally, until conception becomes priority." Andrew moved beside his mother like a soldier reporting for duty. "The terms are acceptable." "Excellent. Come sign." Cecilia crossed the room on foreign legs. Andrew stood opposite her, close enough that his cologne made her dizzy, expensive, understated, intoxicating. As Vivian droned through clauses about finances, property rights, custody of hypothetical children, Cecilia studied Andrew's hands, elegant, surprisingly artistic for someone dealing in corporate acquisitions. A thin scar crossed his left knuckle. "Miss Beck, your signature." The pen weighed like lead. Cecilia signed carefully, watching her name appear like a verdict. Andrew signed beside her, his signature bold and decisive. Their hands were inches apart, yet separated by infinite distance. "Perfect." Vivian gathered documents triumphantly. The announcement goes out tomorrow. Vivian swept out, her attorneys following. Silence crashed down. Cecilia gathered courage and looked directly at Andrew. I know this isn't what either of us wanted. You know nothing about what I want. His words cut like blades. He stepped back, adjusting cufflinks with deliberate care. This is business. I suggest we both remember that. The dismissal landed like a slap. Cecilia lifted her chin, refusing to let him see the wound. Then we understand each other perfectly. Good. He turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on brass. For just a moment, his shoulders tensed as though fighting some internal battle. But when he glanced back, his face remained that impenetrable mask. The car collects you at 9 on the wedding day. Don't be late. He vanished into shadows, leaving Cecilia alone. The wedding day arrived wrapped in false sunshine. Cecilia stood in the bridal suite wearing a gown costing more than her parents' house, French lace, Italian silk, a bodice sculpted to her body. She looked like a princess from dark fairy tales, where princes are curses rather than blessings. The ceremony passed in fragments. 500 strangers filled the cathedral, her father's arm trembling as he walked her down an endless aisle. Andrew waiting at the altar in tailored perfection, his face carved from marble. When their gazes locked, Cecilia saw something flicker, pain perhaps, or regret. But the moment passed before she could confirm it existed. Andrew delivered vows like reading a grocery list, each word precisely enunciated and completely hollow. When he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, his hands were steady, professional. The touch of strangers performing required tasks. The kiss was brief, cold, over before Cecilia could register it happening. Andrew pulled back immediately, offering his arm with mechanical courtesy. They walked through cascading rose petals and applause from people who understood nothing. The reception was torture, dressed in champagne. Cecilia smiled until her face ached, danced with strangers, accepted congratulations that felt like condolences. Andrew remained at her side, the perfect attentive groom for public consumption, but his hand on her waist felt lifeless. When Vivian approached during dinner, her satisfaction was palpable. You both performed admirably. The photographs will be stunning. As evening drew to merciful close, Cecilia found herself alone on the terrace in her wedding gown, watching guests depart in luxury cars glittering like jewels in darkness. You should go inside. It's getting cold. She turned to find Andrew standing nearby, jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking exhausted in ways that made him devastatingly human. I don't feel cold, Cecilia lied. Andrew moved closer, close enough that she could see shadows beneath his eyes. He reached out as though to touch her face, his hand trembling in the space between them. Then his mother's laughter carried from inside, and Andrew's hand dropped like he'd been burned. The walls slammed back behind his eyes. Separate wings, as agreed, he said, his voice returning to awful flatness. I won't disturb you. He walked away without another word, disappearing into the estate's shadows, leaving Cecilia alone in her wedding dress, understanding with devastating clarity that she'd just married a man who was already a ghost. Chapter 2. The Transformation. 3 weeks of marriage felt like 3 years in hell. Cecilia learned the estate's rhythms like a prisoner learns guard rotations. Vivienne took breakfast at precisely 7, holding court over coffee and financial reports, using morning meals to issue instructions disguised as suggestions. Andrew attended with religious devotion, discussing quarterly earnings while Cecilia sat silent, learning her role was decorative rather than participatory. Dinners were worse, elaborate affairs where Vivienne dissected Cecilia's every choice, how she held her fork, topics she mentioned, dresses she selected. Each meal became an examination Cecilia perpetually failed, while Andrew watched with terrible detachment. The separate bedrooms felt like adjacent cells. Cecilia's suite was beautiful in museum display ways, expensive, curated, completely lacking warmth. She spent evenings alone, reading books from the library, staring at walls covered in artwork chosen by someone else's hands. Then Vivienne left for Europe. The announcement came over breakfast on a grey morning. I'll be in London, Paris and Berlin for the next month, Vivienne said, finalizing the Rothstein manufacturing acquisition. Andrew, I trust you can manage affairs here. Of course, Mother. Andrew's response was automatic, but Cecilia detected something shift in his posture. Vivienne left that afternoon in a convoy of black cars, and the estate seemed to exhale. Cecilia was reading in the library that night when she heard footsteps. She looked up expecting a housekeeper and found Andrew instead, standing in the doorway without his usual armor. He wore jeans and a plain shirt with rolled sleeves, his hair damp from showering. The transformation was startling. "I didn't mean to disturb you." His voice was different, quieter, uncertain, missing that terrible flatness. "You're not disturbing me." Cecilia's heart hammered. Andrew moved into the room and sat across from her, fireplace crackling between them. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken things pressing down like atmosphere before storms. "I need to tell you something," Andrew finally said, hands clasped between his knees, gaze fixed on flames. "About why I've been the way I've been." Cecilia waited, barely breathing. "When I was 12, my father tried to stand up to her." Andrew's voice was rough. "He told her he wanted more involvement in my life, that he disagreed with how she was raising me. She destroyed him for it, systematically, methodically. She had him removed from his company position, froze his accounts, isolated him from everyone. Within 6 months, he'd had a breakdown. Within a year, he'd stopped speaking entirely. He lived in this house like a ghost until he died when I was 16. Cecilia's throat constricted. "I learned young that loving something means giving her a weapon to use against you." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw. "So I learned not to love anything, not to want anything. It was survival." "Then why tell me this now?" Andrew leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "Because I've been lying. Every moment since you walked into this library that first day, I've been lying." The world tilted. Lying about what? About not caring. About being indifferent. About this being just business. "Cecilia, the moment I saw you, something inside me recognized you like I'd been searching my whole life without knowing it. And it terrified me because I knew what my mother would do if she suspected, how she'd use you against me, how she'd destroy you to maintain control." Cecilia couldn't breathe. "I've been pretending in front of her because it's the only way to protect you," Andrew continued. "But she's gone now. For a month, she's gone, and I can't keep pretending when we're alone. I can't keep treating you like you don't matter when you're all I think about." He reached across the space, his hand trembling as it cupped her face with gentleness that made her eyes sting. His thumb traced her cheekbone like she was precious. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you after how I've treated you," Andrew said, his voice breaking. "But I'm asking anyway. Let me show you who I am when she's not watching." Cecilia's hand covered his, pressing his palm more firmly against her face. "You're not a coward. You're surviving." Something in Andrew's expression crumbled. He leaned forward slowly, and when she didn't pull away, his lips met hers with tenderness that unmade her completely. The kiss was nothing like their wedding. This was heat and hunger, and 4 weeks of repressed longing, finally given permission to exist. Andrew's hands slid into her hair as he deepened the kiss, and Cecilia found herself responding with intensity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me, please." He led her through darkened hallways to rooms that were clearly his private sanctuary. Books stacked everywhere, artwork chosen for love rather than investment. They talked through the night like people starving for real conversation. Andrew told her about poetry he wrote in secret, music he loved that his mother considered frivolous, dreams he'd abandoned. Cecilia shared her own stories, growing up in a family struggling to maintain appearances, her love of textile design that would never become a career. As dawn started painting the sky grey, Andrew pulled her close on a worn leather couch, her head resting on his chest while his heartbeat thrummed steadily beneath her ear. "When she comes back," he said quietly, "I'll have to be cold again in front of her." I need you to know that every moment of that coldness is a lie. That this, us, here, now, this is the truth. Cecilia tilted her face up. Then we'll have two lives, the one she sees and the one that's real. They made love as sunrise broke over the estate, tender and desperate and achingly real. Andrew whispered her name like it was sacred, touched her like she was the answer to questions he'd been too afraid to ask. The next 3 weeks became their secret rebellion. Every night, Andrew came to her. Sometimes they talked until dawn. Sometimes they cooked together in the massive kitchen, laughing over his terrible attempts at making pancakes. He took her to his private lake house on weekends, a place hidden in mountains where they could pretend to be normal people falling in love. Andrew read her poetry while rain hammered windows. He made love to her like worship, learning every sound she made, treating her pleasure as something sacred. Cecilia began to hope, began to believe that maybe love could exist inside this cage. Then Vivienne came home 3 days early. Cecilia was in the garden when she heard cars arriving. Her stomach dropped before she heard familiar heels on stone. She turned to find Vivienne approaching. "Cecilia, how unexpected. You look different. Happier. How curious." Before Cecilia could respond, Andrew appeared from the opposite path. Their eyes met, and Cecilia saw the exact moment walls slammed back behind his expression. "Mother, we weren't expecting you until next week." Berlin negotiations concluded early. Vivienne's smile was razor-sharp as her gaze moved between them. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Andrew moved to his mother's side with mechanical precision, the distance he put between himself and Cecilia more devastating than any words. "Of course not. We were simply enjoying the grounds separately." Separately. Vivienne's tone suggested she knew the lie. "Cecilia, you should return to your rooms. I need to discuss business with Andrew privately." Cecilia watched Andrew's jaw tighten, watched him fight some internal battle. But when he finally looked at her, his eyes were empty. "Yes, that would be best. I'll see you at dinner, Miss Beck." Miss Beck. The formality landed like a knife between her ribs. Vivienne linked her arm through Andrew's and led him away, already discussing quarterly reports, reclaiming her son like he'd never been anything else. Cecilia stood alone in the garden, understanding with brutal clarity that the man who'd held her through nights only existed in spaces his mother couldn't see. Chapter 3. The Stolen Beginning. Cecilia discovered she was pregnant on a morning that felt like the world ending and beginning simultaneously. She sat on cold bathroom floor, staring at the positive test in trembling hands, understanding this changed everything. This tiny cluster of cells would either save them or destroy them completely. Andrew was in Singapore for business, scheduled to return in 3 days, and Cecilia spent those 72 hours alone with knowledge growing inside her body and terror growing inside her mind. When Andrew finally came home, slipping into her room past midnight with careful quiet, Cecilia didn't give him time to speak. She simply held out the test, watching his face as understanding crashed over him. His reaction was primal. Andrew pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. His face buried in her hair, his body shaking with what might be sobs or laughter or both. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her neck, his voice breaking. "God, Cecilia, we're having a baby." They stood tangled together in darkness, neither willing to let go, both understanding this moment was the last peaceful breath before storms. The next morning, Andrew requested a private meeting with his mother. Cecilia wasn't invited, but she heard about it later from a housekeeper. Apparently, Andrew had announced the pregnancy with clinical detachment, framing it as successful execution of contract terms. Vivienne had been pleased, already making phone calls to her personal physician. By evening, Cecilia's entire world had been reorganized around the life inside her. Vivienne summoned her to the study where the older woman sat behind a desk like a general planning warfare. "Congratulations are in order, I suppose. You fulfilled your primary obligation faster than expected." Cecilia remained standing, her hands instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Thank you." I've arranged for the finest obstetrical care available. Dr. Fleming will see you tomorrow. He's completely discreet and has handled pregnancies for several prominent families." Vivian's smile was calculation. "Given the delicate nature of this situation, I think it's best if you remain on the estate for the duration. Complete bed rest in coming months naturally. We can't risk anything happening to the heir." The words felt like traps closing. "I'm perfectly healthy. There's no reason for bed rest." "I think there's every reason." Vivian's voice carried steel beneath silk. "You'll be provided with everything you need. Andrew will, of course, continue with his business obligations. A man can't be expected to hover over an expectant mother when there's an empire to run." Cecilia felt walls moving closer. "I'd like to have my own doctor. Dr. Fleming is the best, I insist." Vivian stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. "You must understand, Cecilia, that this child isn't simply yours. It's a Liskey heir. Everything about this pregnancy will be handled with the care and control that position requires." The warning was clear. Cecilia nodded, retreating to her room, where she found Andrew waiting, his face tight with barely suppressed fury. "She's already trying to take control," Cecilia said. "I know. I heard her on the phone with Fleming. She's setting up surveillance disguised as medical care." Andrew pulled her close, his hand splaying across her stomach with protective tenderness. "But we'll manage it. We'll play her game while building our escape route. The moment this baby is born, the moment you're both safe, we're leaving. I don't care what it costs." The pregnancy months crawled by in strange mixture of joy and imprisonment. Cecilia's body changed, swelling with life, while her world grew smaller. Vivian enforced bed rest with religious fervor, having meals brought to Cecilia's room, limiting her movement through the estate, controlling every aspect of prenatal care. Dr. Fleming visited weekly, always with Vivian present, always asking questions that felt less about health and more about surveillance. How was she sleeping? Was Andrew being attentive? Did she have concerns about family dynamics? Each query felt like probes for weaknesses Vivian could exploit. But Andrew found ways to breach barriers. He'd slip into her room late at night after his mother retired, lying beside Cecilia in darkness with his hand on her growing belly, feeling their baby move beneath his palm. He'd read to her, poetry and novels and ridiculous celebrity gossip that made her laugh, bringing pieces of outside world into her gilded cage. "I've been meeting with attorneys," Andrew whispered one night when Cecilia was 6 months along, her body round and unfamiliar, "setting up accounts my mother can't access, making arrangements for us to disappear if necessary. She'll never let you go." Cecilia's hand covered his on her stomach. "Then we'll make her." His voice carried conviction that scared her with its intensity. "I've spent my whole life being her obedient heir. I won't let our child grow up in that same prison." At 7 months, the doctor confirmed twins. Cecilia watched Andrew's face when he heard the news, saw terror and wonder warring. Vivian's reaction was different, calculating satisfaction, as though she'd just doubled investment returns. "Twins. How fortunate." Vivian's smile was serpentine. "Once they're born, we'll need to discuss your role moving forward. 2 heirs means a more complex situation regarding custody arrangements." The words sent ice through Cecilia's veins. "What do you mean, custody arrangements?" "Simply that we'll need to formalize expectations, ensure proper care and upbringing." Vivian waved a hand dismissively. "Nothing to concern yourself with now. Focus on carrying them to term safely." That night, Andrew held Cecilia while she cried with fear she couldn't articulate. "She's planning something," Cecilia whispered. "I know." Andrew's arms tightened. "But so am I. Whatever she tries, I'll stop her, I swear it." They chose names in secret, whispered in darkness where Vivian couldn't hear. Callahan for the boy, strong and unexpected. Isadora for the girl, beautiful and rare. Andrew would trace the letters on Cecilia's belly while the babies kicked against his palm, as though they already knew their father's touch. The labor started 3 weeks early during a terrible argument. Andrew had been insisting on moving Cecilia to a private wing, away from Vivian's constant surveillance. His mother had refused, her voice sharp with displeasure. The argument escalated through dinner, both forgetting Cecilia was present, until she felt the first contraction rip through her body hard enough to make her gasp. Andrew was at her side instantly, his face draining of color. "The hospital now!" Vivian moved with terrifying efficiency, already on the phone, already arranging everything. Within minutes, Cecilia was in a car, Andrew beside her holding her hand, while contractions came faster, harder. And Vivian in the front seat, her presence like a curse as they raced through city streets. The pain was beyond anything Cecilia had imagined. Hours blurred in haze of agony and exhaustion, nurses moving around her, Andrew's voice in her ear telling her she was strong, she was incredible, she could do this. But then something went wrong. Alarms started beeping, doctors converged with urgent voices. The word hemorrhaging cut through her consciousness like a blade. She saw Andrew holding two small bundles, tears streaming down his face. Saw him bring the babies close for just a moment, letting her feel their weight on her chest, their warmth, their existence. Then the medical team was pushing everyone aside, saying she needed emergency surgery immediately. Andrew's face was the last thing she saw before anesthesia pulled her under, his expression filled with terror and love and helpless desperation. When consciousness returned, nothing was right. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. Cecilia woke in a room she didn't recognize. The disorientation was immediate and profound. This wasn't the hospital where she'd given birth. The walls were different. Pale green instead of institutional white. The bed was softer. The equipment surrounding her was minimal, almost sparse. She tried to sit up and pain lanced through her abdomen. "Miss Beck, please don't try to move." A nurse appeared, young and professional, her smile practiced. "You've had major surgery. You need to rest." "Where am I?" Cecilia's voice came out raspy. "Where are my babies?" The nurse's smile faltered. "You're in a private recovery facility. Your surgery went well, but you need time to heal before—" "Where are my babies?" Cecilia tried to push herself upright despite agony. "I want to see my children, now." "I'll get the doctor." The nurse retreated quickly. The doctor who arrived was older, distinguished, with kind eyes that somehow made everything worse. "Mrs. Liskey, I'm Dr. Hammond. You're recovering from emergency surgery to repair significant internal bleeding. You're very lucky to be alive." "My babies? Where are my babies?" Dr. Hammond's expression grew cautious. "I was told they were taken home by family members after birth. That's standard procedure when the mother requires extended recovery." "What family members?" "My husband. Where's Andrew?" Cecilia reached for the phone beside her bed, her hands shaking. She dialed Andrew's number. Disconnected. She tried the estate. A housekeeper answered, someone Cecilia didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, the Liskey family is traveling abroad. No forwarding information available." "That's impossible. I was just with them." The housekeeper hung up. Terror crashed over Cecilia like icy water. She tried Andrew's mother's number, his business line, every contact she could remember, either disconnected or answered by people claiming ignorance. She demanded her clothes, her phone, her belongings. The nurse brought a bag with a change of clothes and nothing else. No phone, no wallet, no identification. "Where are my things?" Cecilia's voice rose toward hysteria. "My hospital records, birth certificates. I gave birth to twins. There must be documentation." Dr. Hammond exchanged glances with the nurse. "Mrs. Liskey, I think you need to rest. You've been through significant trauma, and sometimes after difficult births, women experience confusion." "I'm not confused." Cecilia threw off blankets, ignoring pain screaming through her body. "I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Their names are Callahan and Isadora. My husband is Andrew Liskey. His mother is Vivian Liskey. They were with me at the hospital." "I'm sure everything will make sense once you've had time to heal," Dr. Hammond said soothingly. "For now, please rest." But Cecilia knew. With sickening certainty, she knew what had happened. While she'd been unconscious, Vivian had executed a plan, transferred her to a different facility, created a new narrative, made her disappear. She was discharged 3 days later into a city that suddenly felt hostile and foreign. The hospital bill was marked "paid in full by anonymous donor." She had no money, no identification, no way to access any accounts. The address on her discharge papers was a women's shelter downtown. Cecilia stumbled through those first hours in fog of disbelief. She called the police, but without identification, without proof. Her story sounded delusional. She tried to find the hospital where she'd given birth, but every facility she contacted had no record of her admission. She went to the Liske estate. The gates were locked, guards posted who claimed no knowledge of her. She shouted Andrew's name until security threatened to call police for trespassing. She tried to reach her own family, but they'd changed their numbers, moved without forwarding addresses, vanished as completely as her husband and children. Vivienne Liske had erased her. Cecilia's first week at the shelter was spent in haze of grief so profound she could barely function. Other women would find her crying in the bathroom at 3 in the morning, her shirt soaked with milk meant for babies she couldn't feed. But the second week, something shifted. The grief didn't diminish, but it crystallized into something harder, colder, rage, purpose. She found work cleaning offices at night, saving every penny. She went to legal aid offices, learning about custody law, about how to prove something happened when all evidence has been destroyed. Without identification, without records, without resources, she had no legal standing. So she would build herself back from nothing. She would become someone powerful enough that Vivienne Liske couldn't hide her anymore. The transformation took 3 years of brutal dedication. Cecilia worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices, waiting tables, doing data entry, sleeping 4 hours a night, saving every dollar. She enrolled in community college, then transferred to state university on scholarships earned through perfect grades achieved through sheer force of will. She changed everything about herself, cut her long hair short and professional, learned to walk like someone who owned boardrooms, trained herself to speak with authority, to command attention, to become the kind of woman who couldn't be dismissed or erased. She attended seminars, networked relentlessly, positioned herself for opportunities. When a junior analyst position opened at Hartwell Industries, one of the Liske Corporation's biggest competitors, Cecilia applied with a resume built on nothing but determination and intelligence. She got the job. She was good at it. Better than good. She understood markets, read trends before they emerged, executed deals with precision that made executives decades her senior take notice. She rose fast, analyst to senior analyst, to manager to director. The entire time she was studying the Liske empire, learning its structure, its weaknesses, its secrets. She hired private investigators with money she could barely afford, gathering photographs of her children from a distance. Callahan and Isadora growing from babies to toddlers without knowing their mother existed. She became C.J. Beck professionally, shedding the first name that felt too vulnerable. C.J. Beck was made of steel and ambition. C.J. Beck took no prisoners. By the time she reached senior vice president, Cecilia barely recognized herself in mirrors. But she recognized the hunger in her eyes, the promise of vengeance that burned there constantly. She attended a charity gala on a winter evening, knowing the Liske family would be present. She wore red, bold, unapologetic, and moved through the crowd like she owned it. When Vivienne's eyes found her across the ballroom, Cecilia saw the moment recognition hit. Saw the older woman's face pale slightly, saw calculation flicker behind polished exterior. Cecilia held her gaze with a smile that promised consequences, then turned away to charm a group of investors. She felt Andrew's presence before she saw him, felt his stare like electricity across her skin, but she didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she laughed at someone's joke, touched an investor's arm with casual confidence, played the role of a woman who'd never been broken. That night, alone in her penthouse apartment, Cecilia stood in darkness, looking out over the city. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights were her children, 4 years old, walking, talking, becoming people she didn't know. She opened a hidden drawer and pulled out the only item she'd kept, a hospital bracelet from when she gave birth, and a photograph that someone had anonymously sent her 2 years ago, Andrew, holding 2 newborns, his face filled with love and terror. Cecilia allowed herself 60 seconds to feel everything. Then she put the items away, closed the drawer, and returned to her plans. Vivian Liske had started this war. Cecilia was going to finish it. Chapter 5. The Counterattack. The boardroom fell silent when C.J. Beck entered. Cecilia had learned that power wasn't about being the loudest voice, but about commanding attention through sheer presence. She moved through Hartwell Industries' executive suite with confidence of someone who'd earned every inch of position, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. The acquisition meeting was supposed to be routine, Hartwell Industries considering purchase of a small tech startup with promising patents. But Cecilia had maneuvered behind scenes to ensure the Liske Corporation was also bidding, setting up direct confrontation. "Gentlemen, let's begin." Cecilia took her seat at the head of the table. Across from her sat Liske Corporation representatives, 3 men in expensive suits who radiated arrogance. The lead negotiator smirked slightly. "Miss Beck, we weren't expecting Hartwell to send such junior representation." Cecilia smiled, and it was all teeth. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. C.J. Beck, Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. I've closed 17 deals in the past 18 months with a combined value of $4 billion. And you are?" The smirk faltered. "Thomas Brenner, Chief Acquisition Officer." "Mr. Brenner, lovely. Shall we discuss why your company's valuation proposal is 40% below market standard, or should we skip directly to the part where you withdraw your bid?" What followed was masterclass in corporate warfare. Cecilia dismantled every argument, anticipated every move, backed up every claim with data proving she'd done her homework far more thoroughly than anyone expected. She didn't just win the negotiation, she dominated it. By the time the meeting concluded, Hartwell had secured the acquisition at favorable terms, and Liske Corporation had walked away with nothing. Her reputation in the industry had been building for years, but that meeting became a turning point. Word spread quickly about the woman who'd outmaneuvered the mighty Liske Corporation. Investment firms started calling. Business publications requested interviews. She declined most, staying focused at Hartwell, where she had leverage and positioning to continue targeting the Liske empire. Her penthouse apartment reflected her new reality: minimalist, expensive, strategically located downtown with views stretching for miles. Beautiful in cold, untouchable way. A home that was really just a well-decorated staging ground for warfare. She'd hired a private investigator named Raymond, who provided weekly updates about her children. The photographs he delivered were simultaneously the best and worst part of her week. Callahan loved building things, apparently, always constructing elaborate structures. Isadora was bold and curious, constantly asking questions, unafraid of anything. Cecilia studied those photographs like sacred texts, memorizing every detail, trying to know her children through images captured from distance. Raymond also tracked Andrew's movements. "He's trying to spend more time with the kids," Raymond reported, "but Mrs. Vivian Liske maintains primary control. There's been some legal filing recently. Looks like Mr. Liske is trying to adjust the custody arrangement." That information sat heavy in Cecilia's chest. Andrew was fighting, at least in some capacity, but it didn't change what he'd allowed to happen. Cecilia's strategic targeting of the Liske Corporation intensified. She identified every subsidiary company, every weak point, every opportunity to outmaneuver them. The second confrontation happened at an industry conference where Cecilia was keynote speaking. She knew Andrew would be there, had confirmed it through her network, and dressed accordingly in a power suit that cost more than her entire first year's salary. She delivered her speech with calculated brilliance, discussing corporate transformation and strategic positioning, making subtle references to Liske Corporation tactics without naming them directly. When the speech concluded to significant applause, Cecilia worked the room with practiced ease. She felt Andrew's presence before she saw him. It was during the cocktail reception that Andrew finally cornered her near the bar. "Miss Beck, I was hoping we might have a word." Cecilia turned slowly, as though just noticing him, her expression professionally polite and completely cold. "I'm sorry, have we been introduced?" Something flickered in Andrew's eyes. Pain, recognition. "Andrew Liskey, Liskey Corporation. I believe our companies have competed for several acquisitions recently." "Ah, yes, the Rothstein bid, the Tanaka merger. How unfortunate for you." Cecilia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "If you'll excuse me, please." The word came out rough, desperate. "Just 5 minutes. Somewhere private." Cecilia studied him for a long moment. He looked older, haunted, like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. 5 minutes. Conference room 4B. She walked away without waiting. The conference room was empty, neutral territory. Cecilia stood with arms crossed, her back to windows. Andrew entered and closed the door, leaning against it like he needed support. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Cecilia. Her name came out like a prayer and plea combined. "That's not my name anymore. Professionally, I go by C.J. Beck." Her voice was ice. "You have 4 minutes remaining. I thought you were dead." The words exploded from Andrew. "My mother told me you died during surgery. Showed me death certificates, hospital records. How convenient for you. One less complication." "No!" Andrew moved toward her, then stopped when she stepped back. "I spent a year in hell thinking I'd killed you, and then I started noticing inconsistencies, started investigating." "Realized what? That your mother stole our children and made me disappear?" Cecilia's control cracked slightly. "That while I was waking up being told I'd had a psychotic break, you were living comfortably. I was looking for you." Andrew's voice rose with desperation. "For 2 years, I've been trying to find any trace. I hired investigators, I confronted my mother, I've been building a case, and our children, Callahan and Isadora. Do they know their mother is alive?" The names hit Andrew like physical blows. "You remember their names?" "I remember everything." Cecilia's voice broke slightly. "Every moment of carrying them, every kick, every nightmare about Vivian taking them away." Andrew's face crumpled. "They don't know about you. My mother has told them their mother died during childbirth, made herself their primary caregiver. I've been fighting in court for more custody, but she's built a case that I'm unstable." "Because you are." The words came out cold and brutal. "You let fear of your mother control you then, and it's still controlling you now. You said you'd protect me. Instead, you let her steal our children." "I know. God, I know." Andrew's hands shook. "I've spent 4 years hating myself, but I'm trying to fix it now. I'm building a case against her, gathering evidence. I'm trying to get our children back. They're not our children anymore." Cecilia's voice was flat, dead. "They're strangers being raised by a woman who destroyed their mother." "Then help me make it right." Andrew took another step forward. "Work with me. We can take her down together. We were never a family." Cecilia's words cut like glass. "We were 2 people playing house in shadows while your mother pulled strings, and I paid the price for believing in you." She moved toward the door, but Andrew stepped into her path. "I never stopped loving you, even when I thought you were dead. I never stopped." Cecilia looked up at him, and for just a moment let him see the full weight of her pain. "Your love meant nothing when it couldn't protect me." She pushed past him and walked out, but she didn't go back to the reception. Instead, Cecilia fled to the parking garage. She sat in her car and cried for the first time in months, great, wrenching sobs. Because seeing Andrew again had done what 4 years of building herself back hadn't been able to undo. It reminded her that beneath the armor, she was still a woman who'd lost everything. The crying lasted until she had nothing left. Then Cecilia checked her makeup, reapplied lipstick with steady hands, and made a decision. Andrew wanted to take down his mother. Fine. But Cecilia was going to do it her way, and she would make sure that when Vivian Liskey fell, she fell so hard, there would be nothing left. Chapter 6. The Relentless Search. Andrew Liskey hadn't slept properly in 4 years, and every waking hour had been spent hunting for ghosts. The insomnia started the night his mother told him Cecilia was dead, But unlike the passive grief Vivian had expected, Andrew's mourning quickly curdled into obsession. Something about the story didn't sit right. Couldn't sit right. In a mind that had been trained since childhood to spot inconsistencies in business deals and human behavior. The first investigator, hired within 2 weeks of Cecilia's supposed death, found the initial crack in Vivian's narrative. The death certificate signature doesn't match Dr. Fleming's usual handwriting pattern, the investigator reported, and the hospital transfer paperwork has timing gaps that don't make medical sense. Andrew had spent $20,000 on that investigation before his mother discovered it and had the investigator threatened into silence, but the seed was planted. Month 2. Andrew personally visited every hospital within a 200-mile radius, claiming he needed closure by seeing where his wife died. None had records of Cecilia Beck or Cecilia Liskay being admitted. The hospital where she'd given birth had transfer records showing she'd been moved to Sacred Heart Recovery Center, a facility that, when Andrew visited, had been closed for renovations the entire month she supposedly stayed there. Month 4. He tracked down Cecilia's family. Her father wouldn't open the door. Her sister spat in his face and said only, "She's gone because of your family's evil." Not dead. Gone. The distinction haunted him. When Andrew hired investigators to follow Cecilia's sister, they discovered the entire Beck family had received a substantial financial payment from Vivian and relocated to another state with instructions to never speak about Cecilia again. Month 6. Andrew found the nurse who'd been on duty during the twins' birth. After 3 meetings and a $50,000 payment, she broke. "Your mother had her own doctor sedate you that night," the nurse whispered in a parking garage at midnight, terrified. "While you were unconscious, she had your wife transferred to a private facility. I heard her on the phone saying something about making sure the girl would be too confused and isolated to cause problems. I'm sorry, I needed the job. I have kids." Month 9. Andrew hired a forensic accountant to trace his mother's personal expenses around the time of the twins' birth. The accountant found payments to Dr. Hammond, to the private facility, to a document forger, to 3 staff members who'd since left the country. The paper trail was there, buried under shell companies and cash transactions. But there. Vivian had spent over $2 million making Cecilia disappear. But finding evidence of the crime and finding Cecilia herself proved to be entirely different challenges. Year 2. Andrew had hired 7 different private investigators by this point, each running into the same dead end. Cecilia had been discharged from the private facility with no identification, no resources, no paper trail. She'd vanished into the city's homeless population like a ghost. One investigator found a women's shelter that had a Cecilia B registered for 3 weeks before she'd moved on, but the trail went cold after that. "It's like she learned to survive by becoming invisible," the investigator told Andrew. "No credit cards, no permanent address, probably working cash jobs. If she's still in the city, she's living completely off the grid." Meanwhile, Vivian was tightening her control over Callahan and Isadora, systematically excluding Andrew from their lives. When Andrew confronted her with evidence of the falsified death certificate, Vivian had him involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility for grief-induced delusions. He spent 2 weeks locked up before his own lawyers could secure his release. That's when Andrew realized his mother would destroy him before allowing the truth to surface. So he stopped confronting her directly and started building his case in secret. Year 3. Andrew began preparing for legal warfare. He documented every piece of evidence about Vivian's crimes. He secretly recorded conversations where she made veiled references to handling the Cecilia situation. He cultivated relationships with staff members willing to testify against her. He moved money into accounts she couldn't access, preparing for the day when she'd try to freeze his assets. But he never stopped searching for Cecilia. He attended every charity function, every industry conference, every business event in the city, scanning crowds for a face he'd memorized down to the smallest detail. He had investigators monitoring hospitals, social services, women's organizations, anywhere a mother desperately searching for stolen children might surface. Year 4. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Andrew's new investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia, had been running facial recognition software on business conference attendees, society event photos, even LinkedIn profiles. The software flagged a woman named C.J. Beck, who'd been rising rapidly through the ranks at Hartwell Industries. "The facial structure matches," Patricia said, pulling up comparison photos. "But everything else is different. The hair, the style, the entire presentation. If this is your wife, she's completely reinvented herself." Andrew stared at the photo of C.J. Beck giving a presentation at a financial summit. The professional armor was impenetrable, the transformation so complete he almost didn't recognize her. But the eyes, those eyes that had looked at him with love during their 3 stolen weeks together, those were Cecilia's eyes. She'd been here the whole time, not broken, not destroyed, but building herself into someone formidable enough to survive in a world that had tried to erase her. Andrew attended the next industry event where C.J. Beck was speaking, sitting in the back of the auditorium, watching her command a room full of executives with authority that made his chest ache with pride and grief. After her presentation, he tried to approach, but her security detail prevented him from getting close. He tried calling Hartwell Industries, asking for C.J. Beck. Her assistant politely declined all meeting requests. He sent letters to her office. They went unanswered. She knew exactly who he was and was choosing to stay hidden from him, protected now by professional success and corporate infrastructure his mother couldn't penetrate. For months, Andrew existed in the strange purgatory of knowing Cecilia was alive, seeing her occasionally from a distance, but being unable to reach her, unable to explain, apologize, or tell her about the 4 years he'd spent searching. Meanwhile, his custody battle with Vivienne intensified. His mother presented psychiatric records from his involuntary commitment, testimony from staff who claimed Andrew was obsessed with a dead woman, evidence of his erratic behavior in searching for someone who didn't exist. The family court judge looked at Andrew with pity. "Mr. Liske, grief is a powerful thing, but you need to accept that your wife is gone and focus on being present for your living children." But Andrew couldn't accept it, because now he had proof she wasn't gone. He had business publications with articles written by C.J. Beck. He had conference registration records showing her attendance. He had security camera footage of her entering Hartwell Industries headquarters every morning. His mother had stolen Cecilia from him once. He wouldn't let her do it twice by convincing the world he was insane for believing in the truth. When Cecilia finally let him speak to her in that conference room, Andrew had so much to say, 4 years of searching and evidence and desperate attempts to find her, that it all came out in a jumbled rush that couldn't possibly convey the reality of what he'd lived through. Watching her walk away from him that day was almost as painful as the night he'd thought she'd died, because this time she was choosing to leave, choosing to face his mother alone rather than trust him again, and Andrew couldn't blame her for that choice, even as it shattered him. That evening, he broke into her apartment, a violation he knew was wrong but couldn't stop himself from committing. He needed her to understand that he hadn't been passively accepting his mother's lies, that he'd been fighting, searching, building evidence to bring Vivienne down. He left the note about Gerald Hutchins, her VP of Finance, who was feeding information to Vivienne. The mole Andrew had discovered through months of tracking his mother's intelligence sources. It was a peace offering, evidence that he could still be useful to her, even if she'd never love him again. When Cecilia had Hutchins arrested the next day, Andrew understood the message. She'd accept his help, but nothing more. They were allies in warfare, not partners in life. It would have to be enough. Because Andrew had spent 4 years searching for a ghost, and now that he'd found her, he'd spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of the second chance he might never receive. Chapter 7. The Alliance. Cecilia executed her next business maneuver with precision of someone who'd been planning it for years. Hartwell Industries announced a hostile takeover bid for Liske Medical Solutions, a subsidiary representing 15% of Liske Corporation's annual revenue. The bid was aggressive, well-funded, and came out of nowhere fast enough that the Liske legal team didn't have time to mount proper defenses. The deal required face-to-face negotiations, and for the first time in 4 years, Cecilia and Andrew were forced into the same conference room. Cecilia arrived at Liskey Corporation headquarters flanked by her legal team, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than some cars. She moved through the building like she owned it. Andrew was already in the conference room when she entered, along with his mother and a battalion of attorneys. The moment Cecilia's eyes met Vivian's, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. "Miss Beck, how unexpected to see you leading this negotiation personally." Vivian's smile was venom. "Though I suppose Hartwell must be quite desperate. Mrs. Liskey, how kind of you to take time from your busy schedule of fraud and conspiracy." Cecilia's tone was pleasant, deadly. "Shall we discuss the terms of your surrender, or would you prefer to waste everyone's time with posturing first?" The room went silent. Andrew was staring at Cecilia like she'd materialized from thin air. Vivian's expression had frozen. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Vivian said carefully. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Cecilia pulled out a folder, sliding copies across the table. Hartwell Industries' bid for Liskey Medical Solutions is backed by comprehensive documentation showing that the subsidiary has been systematically undervalued in your corporate filings, its assets stripped to prop up other divisions, its actual worth approximately 40% higher than your public statements suggest. One of Vivian's attorneys started reviewing documents, his face going progressively paler. "These are confidential internal projections," Vivian said, her voice tight. "How did you obtain?" "Through entirely legal channels, I assure you." Cecilia's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Your company has several disgruntled employees tired of watching you commit securities fraud." What followed was the most brutally efficient negotiation Cecilia had ever conducted. She dismantled every defense, countered every argument, backed up every claim with documentation, proving she'd done homework far beyond what anyone expected. Through it all, Andrew remained silent, watching Cecilia with intensity that made her skin prickle. She could feel his gaze tracking her every movement, but she didn't look at him directly, keeping focus on his mother. After 3 hours, Vivian called for a recess. Cecilia stepped onto the building's rooftop terrace, needing air. The city stretched below her, autumn wind sharp enough to sting. "Cecilia." She didn't turn at Andrew's voice. "We're not supposed to speak without attorneys present." "I don't care about rules anymore." He moved beside her. "What you're doing in there, it's brilliant, devastating, everything she deserves." "I'm not doing it for you." Cecilia kept her eyes on the skyline. "I know. You're doing it for yourself, for our children, for what she stole." Andrew's voice was rough. "But I need you to know that I have evidence too. Documentation of the medical fraud, witness testimony. If we combined our cases..." "I don't need your help." Cecilia finally looked at him. "I've survived 4 years without you." "They're my children too," the words exploded from Andrew. "And I haven't been playing happy anything. I've been fighting her for custody, watching my own mother poison them against me while I gathered evidence." "How noble!" Cecilia's voice dripped sarcasm. "You want credit for finally developing a spine 4 years too late. I want you to stop pushing me away long enough to realize we're on the same side." Andrew grabbed her arm, not hard but with enough force to make her face him. "I failed you, but I'm not that man anymore. Let me prove it." Cecilia stared at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "You want to prove something? Then tell me where my children are right now. Give me an address so I can see them." Andrew's face crumpled. "They're at the estate, but if I take you there, she'll have you arrested for trespassing. She's built legal barriers specifically to keep you away." "Then your proof means nothing." Cecilia pulled away. "You're still more afraid of your mother than committed to fixing what she broke." "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair." Cecilia's control shattered. "I woke up being told I'd had a psychotic break, that the babies I'd carried didn't exist. I was homeless, Andrew. I cleaned toilets at night to afford food. I rebuilt myself from nothing while you were tucking our children into beds I'll never see." The words hung between them, raw and devastating. "I'm so sorry," Andrew whispered. "If I could go back..." But you can't. Cecilia's voice went flat. The past is done. The only thing that matters now is making sure your mother pays and getting my children back. So if you want to help, stay out of my way and let me finish destroying her. She walked back inside before Andrew could respond. By end of day, Hartwell Industries had secured the acquisition at terms representing a significant blow to Liskey Corporation Holdings. Vivian signed the paperwork with a smile that looked more like a snarl. "This isn't over, Miss Beck," Vivian said. "No, it's not." Cecilia gathered documents with satisfaction. "It's only beginning." She left the building without looking back, knowing Andrew was watching her go. That night, Cecilia returned to her apartment to find evidence that someone had been inside. Nothing missing, nothing obviously disturbed, but small things were wrong. A book moved slightly, a drawer not quite closed, the faint scent of expensive cologne. She found the note on her kitchen counter, written in Andrew's handwriting. "I've been investigating the leak in your company. The person feeding information to my mother is named Gerald Hutchins, your VP of Finance. He's been on her payroll for 2 years. I have proof if you want it. We're stronger together than apart. Please let me help you. A." Cecilia stared at that note for a long time, anger and gratitude warring inside her. Andrew had broken into her apartment, a violation, but he'd also given her information that could save her next acquisition attempt. She crumpled the note and threw it away, but not before memorizing every word. The next day, she had Gerald Hutchins fired and arrested for corporate espionage. The move sent shockwaves through both companies. It also sent a message to Andrew. She'd accepted his help, but that didn't mean she forgave him. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. Andrew stopped pretending to maintain equilibrium. He moved permanently into his downtown apartment, cutting off most contact with Vivian except where the twins were involved. The custody battle intensified, Vivian filing motions claiming Andrew was unstable, dangerous, unfit. But Andrew had been preparing his counterstrike for years. He filed his own motions presenting evidence of Vivian's systematic fraud, her manipulation of medical records, witness testimony from staff willing to tell truth. During one custody hearing, Vivian's attorney presented Andrew's recent obsessive behavior as evidence of instability. Mr. Liskey has been stalking a business executive named C.J. Beck, making wild accusations that she's his supposedly deceased wife. "It's not a delusion," Andrew interrupted calmly, presenting documentation. "C.J. Beck is Cecilia Beck, my wife, who was made to disappear after giving birth. I have evidence that my mother orchestrated her disappearance, including falsified death certificates, payment records, witness testimony. The court can verify Miss Beck's identity through DNA testing." The courtroom erupted. Vivian's face went white, then red with fury, but the next revelation truly changed everything. The nurse from the twins' birth finally agreed to testify officially. "Mrs. Vivian Liskey told me to administer sedatives to Mr. Andrew Liskey without his knowledge or consent," she stated under oath. "While he was unconscious, she had his wife transferred to a different facility and told me to document that the patient had died during surgery. She paid me $50,000 to falsify medical records." The evidence was damning enough that the judge ordered a full investigation. Social services became involved, conducting evaluations of the twins' living situation. Vivian moved to counterattack. She increased security around the estate, making it impossible for Andrew to see the children. She leaked stories to press painting Andrew as mentally ill, dangerous. But the investigation continued. Meanwhile, Cecilia was executing her own systematic dismantling. The acquisition of Liskey Medical Solutions had been just the beginning. She identified every weak point in Vivian's empire. Hartwell Industries began a coordinated campaign of corporate warfare that was brilliant in its ruthlessness. Cecilia poached key executives, identified patents that Liskey Corporation had been underutilizing, cultivated relationships with Liskey's biggest clients. The financial markets noticed. Liskey Corporation's stock started dropping. The two campaigns, Andrew's legal assault and Cecilia's corporate warfare, began converging. It was during a particularly brutal court session that Andrew finally saw his children for the first time in 2 months. Vivian had been required to bring Callahan and Isadora to the courthouse for interviews with the child psychologist. Andrew stood in the courthouse hallway as a social worker brought his twins toward him. They looked uncertain, confused, holding hands like they did when scared. "Father," Callahan said tentatively. Andrew dropped to his knees, bringing himself to their level, fighting back tears. "Hey, buddy. Hey, Isadora. I've missed you both so much." "Grandmother says you've been sick," Isadora said, her voice small. "She says that's why we couldn't see you." "I'm not sick, I promise." Andrew wanted to pull them into his arms but didn't dare without permission. "I've been fighting to spend more time with you." "Grandmother says our mama died when we were born," Callahan said, his expression solemn. "That she was weak and couldn't handle it." The words hit Andrew like a punch. This was what Vivian had been teaching them, that their mother was weak, that her death was somehow her fault. "Your mama was the strongest person I ever knew," Andrew said carefully. "And someday when you're ready, I'm going to tell you the truth about what happened." The social worker led them away, and Andrew stood alone, understanding that his mother had done damage that might take years to undo. That evening, Andrew received an unexpected visitor. He opened the door to find Cecilia standing in the hallway, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more like the woman he'd married than the corporate warrior. "I read about the custody hearing," she said without preamble. "About what the children said regarding me." Andrew stepped aside, letting her enter. "I'm sorry. I've been trying to prepare them, but my mother's gotten to them first. They think I was weak, that I failed them." Cecilia's voice was hollow. "Your mother has made sure that even when I get them back, they'll already hate me." "They won't hate you. They don't even really know you yet." Andrew moved closer. "Once we expose what my mother did—" "They're 4 years old!" Cecilia's control shattered. "They're not going to understand complex conspiracies. They're going to see a stranger claiming to be their mother when the only mother they've known is Vivian." The vulnerability in her voice broke something in Andrew. He closed the distance and pulled her into his arms, half expecting her to push away. But she didn't. Instead, she collapsed against him, her face pressing into his chest as 4 years of maintained composure finally crumbled. They stood like that for a long time. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but her expression had shifted into something determined. "We need to finish this," she said. "Together. Your legal case combined with my corporate warfare, we can destroy her completely." "What changed?" Andrew asked carefully. "Seeing what she's done to our children's perception of me changed things." Cecilia's voice was steel. "I can't undo that alone, so we work together until she's gone. Then we figure out how to be parents to children who've been taught to see us as enemies." Andrew nodded. "Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a temporary ceasefire." "I have evidence about her financial crimes," Andrew said, "enough to trigger federal investigation." "And I have evidence about insider trading and market manipulation," Cecilia added. "Between us, we can build a case that puts her in prison." They spent the rest of the evening comparing notes, laying out strategy. It felt strange working beside Cecilia again, their minds operating in tandem. But the easy intimacy was gone, replaced by professional distance and careful boundaries. As dawn started breaking, Cecilia stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "When this is over," she said quietly, "we're going to have to figure out how to co-parent children who barely know either of us. It won't be a fairy tale." "I know." Andrew's voice was equally quiet. "But maybe we can build something real from the wreckage." Cecilia nodded once, then left. Andrew stood alone, understanding that the endgame was finally beginning. Chapter 9. The Final Assault. The coordinated strike against Vivian Liskey's empire began on a grey morning when autumn was surrendering to winter. Cecilia and Andrew had spent weeks preparing every detail, coordinating attacks to hit simultaneously from legal, corporate, and regulatory directions. The strategy was designed to overwhelm Vivian's considerable defenses through sheer volume and precision. Cecilia struck first. Hartwell Industries announced a hostile takeover bid for Liskey Corporation itself, backed by a consortium of investors she'd been cultivating for months. The bid was comprehensive and devastating, exposing systematic undervaluation of assets, fraudulent financial reporting, evidence of securities violations that would trigger immediate SEC investigation. The business press exploded. Liskey Corporation's stock price plummeted as investors realized the extent of hidden problems. Simultaneously, Andrew filed criminal complaints with federal prosecutors, presenting evidence of medical fraud, conspiracy, falsification of legal documents, kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony, bank records showing payments for falsified death certificates, documentation about Cecilia's forced disappearance. Within 48 hours, federal investigators raided Liskey Corporation headquarters. The FBI opened investigations. The custody court expedited its review, ordering immediate temporary custody changes. Vivian fought back with everything she had, mobilizing her network, threatening lawsuits, attempting to have evidence suppressed. But the coordinated nature of attacks left her scrambling. The press coverage became intense, a business empire under investigation while its matriarch faced personal charges. The story had everything: wealth, deception, family drama. Cecilia watched it unfold from Hartwell Industries headquarters, tracking every development with clinical satisfaction. Andrew was fighting his own battles in family court, where the custody evaluation had finally been completed. The court-appointed psychologist's report was damning for Vivian, detailing her systematic exclusion of Andrew, her manipulation of systems, the psychological harm done to twins. The judge ordered immediate custody changes, granting Andrew primary physical custody with strict limitations on Vivian's access. The court is ordering family therapy for Mr. Liskey and the minor children, the judge said during the hearing. We're also ordering supervised reunification process for the children's biological mother, Ms. Cecilia Beck, whose existence and rights have been systematically denied. This will be gradual and carefully managed to minimize trauma. Vivian's attorney tried to object, but the judge shut him down. Mrs. Liskey, you have perpetrated one of the most elaborate and cruel frauds this court has encountered. The only reason you're not being immediately remanded is because federal prosecutors are still building their criminal case. The first custody transition happened under supervision of social workers. Andrew arrived at the estate to collect Callahan and Isadora, finding them in the library where this nightmare had begun. Vivian sat with the twins on either side, her expression a mask of composure. The children looked terrified, clinging to their grandmother. "Callahan, Isadora," the social worker said gently, "you're going to go stay with your father now." "I want to stay with grandmother," Isadora said, tears streaming. "Please don't make us leave." Andrew's heart shattered. This was what Vivian had done, made the children love her while systematically excluding him. The transition was terrible, both children crying, Vivian maintaining composure while projecting martyrdom, the social workers gently but firmly separating them. The first weeks were the hardest thing Andrew had ever experienced. The twins were grieving, angry, confused. They acted out, testing boundaries, asking constantly when they could go back. Andrew tried to be patient, to create routines, to show them through actions that he was safe and reliable. Meanwhile, Cecilia was preparing for her own reintroduction. The court-ordered reunification process started with supervised visits in a neutral location, a therapist's office designed to look like a comfortable living room. The reunification specialist, Dr. Patel, had been working with the twins for weeks, preparing them. "Your mama didn't die," Dr. Patel explained gently. "She's been away, and now she wants to meet you." The first visit was scheduled for a weekend afternoon. Cecilia arrived early, her stomach churning with anxiety. Andrew brought the twins, staying in the waiting room per instructions. Dr. Patel greeted Callahan and Isadora warmly. "Remember how we've been talking about your mama? She's here today." The door opened, and Cecilia entered. For a moment she couldn't move. These were her children, taller than she'd imagined, their faces showing transition from baby features to real personalities, beautiful and perfect and complete strangers. "Hi," Cecilia managed, her voice shaking. "I'm your mama." The twins stared at her with open hostility. Callahan stepped behind Isadora protectively. Isadora's small face was set in stubborn defiance. "You're not our mama," Isadora said firmly. "Our mama is dead. Grandmother told us." Cecilia's heart cracked, but Dr. Patel had warned her to expect this. "I know that's what you were told, and I'm so sorry. But the truth is that I had to go away when you were babies, and it wasn't my choice." "We don't want to talk to you," Callahan said, his voice trembling. "We want to go back to grandmother." The session lasted only 20 minutes, Dr. Patel ending it early when the twins became too distressed. Cecilia didn't try to touch them, didn't push, just sat across the room while they refused to acknowledge her existence. When they left, Cecilia sat alone and cried. The second visit, 1 week later, was marginally better. The twins didn't hide behind Dr. Patel this time, though they still wouldn't speak to Cecilia directly. They sat on the couch holding hands, watching her with suspicious eyes. "Can I ask you some questions?" Cecilia said gently. "I'd like to know about you." "Why?" Callahan's tone was challenging. "Because you're my children, and I've missed knowing you." "If you're really our mama, why did you leave us?" Isadora's voice cracked slightly. "How did you explain to 4-year-olds that their grandmother was a monster?" "Sometimes grown-ups do things that hurt other grown-ups. Your grandmother did something that kept me away from you. But I never wanted to leave, not for one single day." The twins processed this in silence. Then Callahan asked quietly, "Did you really carry us in your tummy?" "Yes, for 8 months. You kicked a lot." Cecilia smiled through tears. "Especially you, Isadora. You were always moving, always curious, even before you were born." Something flickered in Isadora's eyes. Not acceptance, but maybe the first crack in the wall. Visit 3, 2 weeks later. The twins agreed to sit on the same couch as Cecilia, though with considerable distance between them. Callahan asked about what she remembered from when they were babies. Visit 4, 1 month in. Isadora briefly touched Cecilia's hand when reaching for a toy. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Cecilia felt it like electricity. Visit 5, 6 weeks in. They played a board game together. The twins still called her Miss Beck, but they laughed at something she said. Visit 6, 2 months in. Callahan asked if she knew how to build with blocks. Cecilia spent 30 minutes constructing an elaborate castle with him while Isadora watched, slowly moving closer. The process was agonizingly slow. Every visit, Cecilia left emotionally exhausted, questioning whether her children would ever truly accept her. But Dr. Patel assured her the progress was normal, even good. "They've been told their entire lives that you were dead," Dr. Patel explained. "Accepting that you're alive means accepting that their grandmother lied to them. That's enormous for 4-year-olds to process." Visit 8, 3 months in. Isadora climbed onto the couch next to Cecilia to look at a picture book. Not quite cuddling, but close. Progress. Visit 10, 4 months in. The twins were granted their first overnight visit at Cecilia's penthouse. They were nervous, clutching overnight bags, but they came. Cecilia had spent weeks preparing their room, twin beds with their favorite colors, toys carefully selected based on information from Andrew, nightlights because she'd learned they were afraid of complete darkness. The evening was tentative. The twins were polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable in unfamiliar territory. Meanwhile, the legal and corporate warfare reached its conclusion. Federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against Vivian Liskey: conspiracy, fraud, falsification of legal documents, kidnapping. Liskey Corporation was placed under temporary receivership. The hostile takeover succeeded, with Hartwell Industries acquiring controlling interest. Cecilia personally oversaw the transition. The final confrontation, the moment when everything came together, was still ahead, but the pieces were in place. Chapter 10. The Reckoning. The boardroom of Liskey Corporation had never felt more like a courtroom. Cecilia walked through the marble lobby with Andrew beside her, both dressed in impeccable business attire, both carrying evidence folders representing 4 years of preparation. The hostile takeover had succeeded, which meant this emergency board meeting would determine the company's future and Vivian Liskey's fate. They reached the executive floor, where board members were gathering. Corporate attorneys lined the walls. and at the head of the table, Vivienne Liske sat with her usual composure, though Cecilia could see cracks forming. "This is highly irregular," Vivienne said as they entered. "We have a quorum and proper notice was given per company bylaws," Andrew said calmly. "This meeting is entirely legitimate." Cecilia moved to the opposite end, positioning herself as Vivienne's direct counterpoint. "Shall we begin?" Cecilia's voice carried through the room. "We're here to discuss a vote of no confidence in Vivienne Liske's leadership based on documented evidence of criminal conduct and financial fraud." What followed was systematic presentation that left no room for denial. Andrew detailed the personal crimes, the falsified death certificate, the conspiracy to make Cecilia disappear, the years of lies. Cecilia presented the corporate crimes, securities fraud, insider trading, market manipulation, falsified financial reports. The board members listened with expressions ranging from shock to horror. "These accusations are absurd," Vivienne finally said, her voice tight. "My son has had some kind of breakdown. She's not deceased." Andrew stood, moving to stand beside Cecilia. "She's right here. She survived everything you did and built herself into someone powerful enough to take you down. You tried to erase her, and instead you created your own destruction." Vivienne's composure cracked visibly. "You were supposed to disappear. You were supposed to be broken. How dare you? How dare I refuse to stay erased?" Cecilia's voice was ice and fire. "You stole my children. You took them while I was unconscious and made it impossible for me to get them back. You raised them on lies, poisoned them against their mother, and you did it all because you couldn't stand losing control." "I did what was necessary." Vivienne's voice rose. "Andrew was weak, distracted. He needed to focus on the empire." "You destroyed my father for being weak," Andrew interrupted, his voice shaking. "You told me that story my whole life, but the truth is, you destroyed him because he loved me more than he feared you, and you tried to do the same to Cecilia." The room was silent except for Vivienne's heavy breathing. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice venomous. "You can do nothing." Cecilia cut her off. "You're going to be arrested. You're going to face trial. You're going to lose everything. And your grandchildren will grow up understanding exactly what kind of monster you are." The vote was swift and unanimous. Vivienne Liske was removed from her position. Security was called. Federal agents were already waiting outside. As Vivienne was led away, she stopped in front of them. "They'll never forgive you. My grandchildren. You've taken away the only mother they knew." "Maybe," Cecilia said quietly, "but at least they'll know the truth." Vivienne was escorted out, leaving behind the empire she'd built and the family she'd destroyed. The aftermath unfolded over following months. Federal prosecutors moved forward. The media covered every development. The story became national news. The harder work happened in quieter spaces. Visit 15. 6 months after reunification began, the twins were becoming more comfortable. They still called Cecilia Miss Beck, but the walls were slowly crumbling. Isadora asked if Cecilia would teach her to bake cookies. Callahan showed her his drawings unprompted. Visit 28 months in. The overnight visits had extended to full weekends. The twins had routines at Cecilia's place now, their favorite breakfast, their designated spots on the couch, the books they liked her to read. It was during one of those overnight visits, 10 months after their first meeting, that everything shifted. Cecilia had made dinner, pasta with butter and cheese, their favorite. They ate together at her dining table, Callahan and Isadora chattering about school, slowly getting comfortable, including Cecilia in their world. After dinner, Isadora asked if Cecilia would read them a bedtime story. Cecilia picked a book and sat on the couch. This time, without hesitation, both children climbed up beside her. She read about dragons and princesses and brave knights, her voice steady despite the emotion. Halfway through, Callahan leaned his head against her shoulder. Such a small gesture, but monumental. Cecilia paused, one arm coming around him naturally, and felt Isadora cuddle closer on her other side. "You smell nice," Isadora said sleepily. "Different from grandmother. Warmer." "Thank you, sweetheart." Cecilia's voice cracked. "Can I ask you something?" Callahan's voice was serious. "Of course. Why didn't you come back sooner?" the question she'd been dreading. Cecilia thought carefully. I tried. From the moment I woke up and realized you'd been taken, I tried. But your grandmother made it very hard. She had more power than I did. So I had to spend time getting strong enough to fight her, getting powerful enough that she couldn't keep me away. Father says you became really important, Isadora said, like a superhero. Cecilia smiled, despite tears. Something like that. And then your father and I worked together to make sure we could be with you again. Is father going to live here too? Callahan asked. The question hung in the air. Cecilia looked up to find Andrew standing in the doorway. He'd arrived early to pick them up. From his expression, he'd heard everything. That's something your father and I are still figuring out, Cecilia said carefully. We both love you. We're going to be your parents together. But what that looks like exactly is something we're learning. Andrew moved into the room, sitting in the chair across from them. The most important thing is that you have both of us now, working together to take care of you. Grandmother said love makes you weak, Callahan said quietly. Grandmother was wrong about many things. Andrew's voice was gentle. Love doesn't make you weak. Not being able to love makes you weak. Eventually, Isadora yawned. Will you finish the story, Mama? She asked. The word landed like a miracle. Cecilia's vision blurred. Yes, sweetheart, I'll finish. She read until both children fell asleep against her, their bodies warm and trusting. Andrew helped her carry them to bed, tucking them in. In the hallway, they stood together in semi-darkness, watching through the cracked door. She called you Mama, Andrew said softly. I heard. They moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, maintaining distance. I need you to understand something, Cecilia began. I spent 4 years hating you, and some part of me still carries that anger. I know. But I also need to acknowledge that you stepped up when it mattered. You built the case, you fought for custody, you worked with me even knowing it would destroy your legacy. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for those 4 years. I don't know if I can love you again the way I did before, Cecilia said honestly. That woman died. The woman I am now is harder, more cynical. I'm not asking you to love me. Andrew moved slightly closer. I'm asking for the chance to earn your trust back, one day at a time, to prove I can be worthy of co-parenting with you, and maybe, eventually, someone you could consider letting back into your life. Cecilia studied his face. They'd both been transformed by trauma. I think we need time, she said finally. Time for the twins to adjust. Time for us to heal. Time I can give you. They sat in silence. Eventually, Andrew stood to leave. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I never stopped loving you. And if you never want me as anything more than a co-parent, I'll accept that. But I'll spend every day proving that I'm different from the man who let fear control him. After he left, Cecilia returned to the guest room, watching her children sleep. 2 years later, Vivian Liske was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The Liske Corporation had been restructured. Cecilia had been offered the CEO position, but declined. Andrew had stepped away from corporate leadership, consulting while prioritizing his children. The custody arrangement evolved into something that worked. The twins spent equal time between both parents, with Andrew and Cecilia maintaining daily communication. Slowly, carefully, they became friends. It was during a coffee meeting, nearly 18 months after Vivian's conviction, that Andrew mentioned a consulting position in Singapore. It would mean being gone 3 months, he said. Cecilia felt something twist in her chest at the thought of Andrew being gone. She'd grown accustomed to his presence. Would it be good for your career? It would be, but honestly, I don't want to take it if it means missing 3 months of Callahan and Isadora's lives. And, he paused, I don't want to miss 3 months of whatever this is that we're building. What are we building? She asked. I don't know exactly, but I know that I look forward to these meetings more than almost anything. I know that when something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. I know that you've become my best friend, and I'm terrified of losing that by wanting more, but also terrified of never asking if more might be possible. Cecilia examined her own feelings. The truth was that she looked forward to seeing Andrew too, that she'd started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentleness in his hands when he braided Isadora's hair. "I'm still scared," she admitted, "scared of trusting someone who hurt me so deeply." "I'm scared too." Andrew reached across the table, his hand palm up, offering but not demanding. "But I think maybe being scared together is less terrifying than being scared alone." Cecilia looked at his offered hand, remembering the cost of trust. But she also remembered the man he'd become, someone who'd stood up to his mother, who'd put his children first, even when it meant destroying his family legacy. She placed her hand in his. "No rushing," she said firmly. "We take this slowly, honestly, with our eyes open." "Slowly and honestly," Andrew agreed. The twins noticed the shift. Callahan commented that Mama and Father smiled at each other differently now. Isadora asked if they were going to get married again. "We're taking things very slowly," both parents explained. "But you like each other now," Isadora said with 6-year-old certainty. "Before you were sad. Now you're happy." She wasn't wrong. 1 year later, Andrew and Cecilia took the twins on their first vacation together. They rented a cabin in the mountains. For 1 week, they were just 4 people learning how to be together. On the last night, after the twins were asleep, Andrew and Cecilia sat on the porch, watching stars. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Cecilia said, her shoulder pressed against Andrew's. "I used to think forgiveness meant saying what you did was okay. But I'm realizing it's more about releasing the poison, choosing not to let the past control my present." She turned to look at him. "I forgive you, Andrew. Not because you've earned it, though you have, but because I'm tired of carrying the weight of that anger." Andrew's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself completely, but knowing that you can forgive me means everything." "Then maybe we forgive each other," Cecilia said softly. "You forgive yourself for being human and afraid. I forgive myself for the times I've been harder than necessary. We both forgive the younger versions who didn't know how to fight the monster." Andrew pulled her closer, his arms coming around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Cecilia let herself sink into his warmth, feeling safe. "I love you," Andrew whispered. "I never stopped." Cecilia tilted her face up, seeing truth written in every line. "I love you too. It's different from before, scarred and careful, but it's real." When he kissed her, it tasted like new beginnings and old promises finally kept, like survival and strength and the possibility that broken things could be mended. Inside, their children slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that both their parents loved them. The journey had cost them dearly, years of separation, trauma that would take lifetimes to heal, innocence that could never be recovered. Vivian Liskey's cruelty had carved scars that would never disappear. But here, under stars that had witnessed their destruction and rebuilding, Andrew and Cecilia held each other and understood they'd done the impossible. They'd survived, they'd fought back, and they'd reclaimed the family that had been stolen. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something more real and hard-won, a beginning built on truth instead of illusion, on strength instead of fear, on love that had been tested by fire and emerged scarred but unbroken. And that was enough. The end.